Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Deku become a villain part 5. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video and also share this video with your friends. I have created my other videos playlist, there you can watch my all videos easily, check out as well. Let's start this video. Their training for the entrance exam was finally over as the happy tired trio left their usual training spot. The entrance exams were only a few days away, so whatever happened, they could take the next weekend off just to have fun. Unfortunately, they needed to see Hitachi off for this weekend first, the worst part of every weekend for the past few months. It didn't help that they had worked up plenty of sweat and the February weather did not suit that well. Luckily one of them had blowtorches for hands when there weren't too many people or police close by. Even the ever law-abiding Tenya moved in closer to the heat, covering the fire from being seen in the process. "Thank you," he said. "Can't risk any of us getting sick right before the exams," Izuku said. "At least Tashi is going to get into a warm train soon. And then the next time we meet is going to be at the entrance exams," Hitachi said. "I can barely believe it. The last couple of months have gone so fast, and thanks to you too I feel like I actually have a chance to get into the hero course maybe." "I believe you will, unless they really go out of their way to discriminate against your quirk," Izuku said. "The reason I applied at UA is to keep our group together. But we don't even go to the same school now," Hitachi reminded me. "And we only meet during weekends," Izuku shot back. "Though it did give a good excuse to have you stay over some nights. I hope you will do that even if we go to the same school, or even the same class. There are some people who we might come across at UA, and I will need some friendly faces around if we do." "Are you talking about Bakugo?" Tenya asked. "To think someone like him could be accepted into UA." "Yeah," Izuku answered. "Unfortunately his quirk and fighting talents are no joke and he is smart enough to pass written exams. I'd be surprised if he didn't get in." "Surely UA would vet hero students better than that," Tenya insisted. "They might ask for records from the previous school, but I wouldn't trust Aldera's records. They didn't bother intervening with him, I doubt they recorded anything their prize student did." Sometimes Izuku paused for a moment. His fires disappeared. "Sometimes I wish the sludge villain killed him instead of mom." The trio stopped as Izuku confessed his feelings. "That wasn't a very heroic thing to say," Tenya said, "though I can understand where it came from, a bit." Izuku sighed and kept walking as Hitachi and Tenya kept up with him. "I have never pretended to be a hero." "Well, not in many years," Izuku answered. Tenya opened his mouth to say something, but couldn't. "Don't let Tenya scare you. You can say what you feel," Hitachi said, "and if the exams go well, you won't be dealing with Mr. Boom Boom alone." Izuku chuckled. "Are you trying to come up with ways to provoke him into falling for your quirk?" "Maybe. Because if you actually say that to his face, I'll make dad pay for the funeral." Hitachi and Tenya both stared at him with some shock, especially Hitachi. Izuku looked at them with a blank stare. Slowly Hitachi started chuckling, and it turned out to be contagious. "Yeah," Izuku said when they calmed down. His tone became more serious. "I was only partially joking. He has gotten physically violent many times, especially before my quirk manifested. Considering how much stronger he must have gotten since then, you should be careful around him. Den might be fast enough to get out of the way, but Tashi, you aren't." "Den?" Tenya asked. "Is that what you picked for him?" Hitachi asked with a grin. Izuku rubbed his chin. "I thought I did, but it doesn't sound right, not as good as Tashi. Tenya's name is hard that way. Unlike your Izu, or did you prefer Izuku?" Shinso teased. "Please no," Izuku pleaded. "Those sound too cutesy, like we were dating or something. This isn't some love story. I didn't buy 3 beds to share one with you. No offense." "How could I ever take offense to my dear Izu?" Hitachi teased. That made all of them smirk until they turned a corner and saw the station. Izuku's mood quickly dropped. He turned to face Hitachi. "See you at the exams. Try to sleep before then, Tashi, or I'll take your quirk and make you sleep till the next semester starts." "Is that supposed to be a threat?" "Because it sounds great," Hitachi responded. "Well, I should hurry. The train is leaving." "Don't miss it for us," Tenya added, and the trio separated. Izuku was left with Tenya. He checked his watch. "Can you get home without freezing?" he asked Tenya. "I need to run some errands." "Don't worry about me. See you tomorrow at school." "Hey, watch where you are walking. Oh look, this guy wants a fight. You seem to struggle just standing straight." The trio of shady-looking young men, probably on drugs, were standing in front of Hitachi, seemingly having come from an alleyway next to them and made Hitachi evade, ready to counterattack like Izuku had trained him. 2 of the 3 were walking around Hitachi to trap him. The apparent ringleader held his fingers together, and his hand formed into a metallic-looking blade he held up towards Hitashi's neck. "You must be very sorry about getting in our way. Maybe enough to pay us as an apology and get away with only a little pain." He raised the blade into a strike. "Would be a shame if someone had to tell your mom you." He stopped to scream as an arrow of flame struck his transformed hand and had no time to even realize what was going on as Izuku's shoe met his chin. The walking corpse fell on his back, and before his fellow dead men could get involved, Izuku's dragon blade was already lit and moving towards the man's neck. "Izuku," Hitachi shouted. The blade stopped millimeters from the man's neck as Izuku was left on top of him breathing hard, one little twitch away from taking a life. Slowly his stare hardened even as the man under him started trembling more. "Tell his mom what?" "No, nothing, it's just a big misunderstanding." "Really? It didn't look like it to me." Izuku wanted to say more, but at that moment a hand landed on his shoulder. "Izuku, breathe," Hitachi said. "Let me talk to him." Izuku breathed in deep once and pulled his dragon blade further away from the man's neck. "Do you want to live?" Hitachi asked the man. "Of course." Hitashi's quirk took hold of the man, and his eyes glazed over staring ahead into emptiness. Izuku got off him and checked the other two. One was similarly staring into nothingness. Another was very consciously staring at his brainwashed co-criminals looking terrified and restrained by Tenya. Izuku focused on him with a stare that still promised death if he made a single wrong move while pointing at Hitachi. "My friend will talk to you, and you will respond, or I will find a more painful way to finish this." The last thug nodded several times in a few seconds, and a moment later all three were standing next to the wall staring into nothingness. Izuku could focus on Hitachi. "Are you okay?" "Yes, I would be more worried for you." Hitashi's expression turned sterner. "Izuku, it looked like you were going to. He was going to attack you." "Izuku, were you going to?" Hitachi paused. "Kill him?" Izuku looked away and at the ground unwilling to face either of his friends. "I maybe." It all went so quickly. "I was only focused on how to take him down. Can't even remember anything else before you stopped me." The police car curved on the street, sirens screaming. Izuku picked up his phone. "Not a good time to talk about it. I'll handle this situation." He had a lawyer on the phone before the police stopped to find criminals standing in line ready to be arrested. The whole thing took a while to settle, but at least they didn't get arrested for illegal quirk use. Yes, Izuku saving his friend from getting stabbed and Hitachi non-violently restraining the criminals was a bigger concern to the police than actually taking the scum away. In the end Hitachi only missed 2 trains, and with Tenya walking home Izuku was left alone for just a moment. He had to hurry. He left the station and walked until he found an empty alley with enough cover from curious eyes. After sending a quick text with coordinates, a vortex of dark mist appeared in front of him forming into a warp gate. In a few steps he was back at his usual training room, sweating even more after suddenly transferring into a much warmer space. "I need to wash and get changed. Please be a quick, young Shigaraki. You don't want to be late." "With you it would be hard to," Izuku remarked and walked out towards the shower room. There were no long baths with friends here, and in less than 10 minutes he was already placing his helmet on. He glanced at a mirror before leaving the dressing room. He literally looked like an officer to an army of shadows. How would Hitachi and Tenya react to seeing him like that? Izuku sighed. Maybe he wasn't meant to have pure happiness without the danger and lies of living 2 parallel lives. At least both sides of his life now had something, some people, to live for. Izuku smiled under his helmet as he returned to the training room where Kurogiri was still waiting. As long as he could keep these 4 people, including Nomu, safe and happy, he could be happy. Whether it was pure or not hardly mattered. "Are you ready?" Kurogiri asked and handed Izuku a suitcase. "Yes, let's get this done. Dad doesn't like it if I'm late for the evening training. He's planning something special before the entrance exams." Kurogiri didn't even make a move, but a warp gate appeared next to him. In an instant they were in a parking lot full of trucks. It was a good place to hide stuff while keeping it easily transportable, and no one was hanging around there, especially after sundown. Izuku didn't delude himself by assuming no one could see him though, and made sure to stand straight, not allowing any uncertainty into his body language. The one exception to keeping appearances was when he talked to Kurogiri, making sure to not order or demand anything. "Kurogiri, could you go somewhere where you can look over me from a distance?" "Yes." The word was barely said as Izuku felt Nomu's presence disappear. He checked the communication system of his helmet and stayed still until he heard a car approaching slowly. The car stopped for just long enough for a man to step out before continuing away. Izuku stepped out from between the trucks to face the middle-aged man with eyeglasses and a lit tobacco hanging from his mouth. "Jiren, I assume," Izuku said, his voice altered by the helmet. And you would be Shigaraki, I hear? Jiren responded. One of us, yes. I figured. That helmet would be quite a change of style from a hand on your face. You are thinking about my brother. I trust you don't have a problem dealing with me instead. Nope, at least not based on first impressions. I heard your brother can be bratty. I am glad to deal with someone more mature. I have acquired the first batch of the materials you requested, if you have my payment. I have, Izuku said, and opened the suitcase. It was filled with money and a flash drive with confidential data on new support items his father had acquired. I'm guessing you've hidden your products in one of these trucks. Yes, oh I love dealing with bright individuals, at least after the price has been negotiated, Jiren said. Though that comes with some interesting requests. Usually people want weapons, support items or even new recruits. Advanced medical research equipment and strange chemicals are something else. I've been told you are good at keeping your client information secret, but don't try to pry for information you don't need. The League is interested in dealing with you again in the future, including for those more conventional purchases, so long as you mind only what you need to know. Sounds good to me. This way. Jiren turned around and led Izuku past a row of trucks, seemingly not even paying attention to where he was going as he chatted with Izuku. I've been hoping to meet you for a while, well not you personally, but I have heard whispers of this league of yours for a while, and about your brother. Many people that have talked about you seem to pass you as a couple of crazies who have managed to gather a small army of small-timers with big promises, but it seems there is more than meets the eye, and I don't just mean there being two Shigarakis, although one just appeared recently. Did you just get into the game, or have you worked under a different name? Izuku deemed it best to remain quiet rather than risk trying to come up with an appropriate response, voice changer or not. Jiren had already figured too much. Izuku didn't want to unintentionally give him more information. Jiren waited for a moment before giving up on that question. Do you even have a name? Diaresis. I went by Shirakuro Shigaraki, and Izuku responded. I can see the black. Where is the white? Izuku gave the first part of the response he had thought up ahead of time for his role as Shirakuro, black and white. The casket? Jiren asked just as planned. The one you will be cremated in, if you fail our trust. Ah, I see where you got the name, Jiren stopped. We are here. He turned behind a truck next to them and opened its rear to reveal several large liquid containers and a large amount of advanced-looking scientific and medical machinery. Izuku had no doubts that they were for the doctor to create more nomas, though some might be used to help his father. For that alone Izuku had to complete his mission. He grabbed the side of the truck and leaped on board with a single fluid motion. His helmet had the list of things that were supposed to be there, so the only problem was recognizing the devices listed on his HUD. Without night vision it would have been impossible. Everything seems to be in order, but we will see how they actually work. Just need to be transported now. I can have the truck delivered in any location within 100 kilometers and left alone long enough to be emptied. That won't be necessary, Izuku responded and jumped off the truck. His helmet's inbuilt radio had been active since the beginning. It is all here. You can pick it up. Jiren blinked, looking at him curiously, but Izuku only handed him the suitcase and raised his other hand to point into the open truck. A large warp gate had already opened and was spreading dark mist across the space. Kurogiri's voice came from inside it. It will take a moment to transport this much, young Shigaraki. That's fine, Izuku responded. You're still faster than anyone else. Don't stress your quirk unnecessarily. Well, isn't that nice, Jiren said. Most people in this business don't treat their people that softly. He is one of the few people I can count on with irreplaceable abilities. Why would I treat him anything but well? You are an interesting person. I suspect the darkness of this world will either tear you apart or learn to fear you. Izuku saw it best not to answer so as not to feed the man's interest or risk saying anything he would regret. This man was perceptive, meanwhile Izuku hadn't been able to find out much more than that about him. He had a lot to learn. Either way, if you need gear or people, you know who to call, as long as you can afford to pay. I'll remember that, Izuku responded, and at the last moment had another thought. Tamura would be livid if he found out though. If you want a tip, you should be ready when the league starts getting more attention and see if you can identify anyone whose interests might align. The league is growing in numbers, but could use a few more carefully chosen, powerful individuals interested in changing this country. That sounds like you have big plans. I will keep your tips in mind. Seems your friend is finished. Izuku glanced at the truck where Kurogiri now stood in the otherwise empty space. Jiren walked past Izuku. Close the door after yourself, will ya? I'll wait for your next contact. Izuku stood in place quietly until he was sure Jiren had left and got far enough away. Kurogiri stepped down from the truck and waited quietly next to him. Still not saying a word, Izuku pulled the door closed. There was no sign of anyone nearby. "Time to go," he finally said. "I shall send you straight to Master as he requested." Izuku nodded in response. A warp gate opened in front of him, and he stepped in. "Remember to always be aware of your surroundings," Kurogiri said just as Izuku stepped through the gate. "What?" He stepped into the usual training room. There was movement on his side, and he jumped out of the way just in time before a hand struck through the space he had just occupied, brushing against the protective fabric of his sleeve. It was a hand with elongated, sharp nails, from what he could observe. He didn't have time for anything else as the owner of the hand charged at him again, striking and slashing at a great speed. Izuku barely dodged the barrage and got a tiny bit of breathing room when the sharp-nailed hand struck a shield of fire. The yelp of pain was the first sound the woman had made. Izuku just breathed audibly. He didn't have energy for this after a day of training. With a few steps to put some space between him and his attacker, Izuku could finally worry about what was going on. How had this woman gotten inside, and why? Was his father okay? Izuku didn't recognize the woman as any hero he knew of either. He turned a bit as he evaded a new attack and finally noticed his father in a dark corner of the room. He brought the shield up to deflect another strike, but this time the attacking woman was prepared and pulled her hand back, then jumped back when Izuku slashed at her with a flaming blade stretched to its max length. "Dad, what is going on?" "Your exam. Despite all of the training you've had, you have never experienced a true battle with another human to the end. Better do that here to harden you in case you have to face the same out there." "Are you kidding? Do I joke about these things? This is the minimum requirement just to be capable of surviving in this world and completing your missions." As all for one spoke, the woman started attacking Izuku again, making paying attention to his father quite difficult. "Your opponent is not in here out of her own free will. I gave her only two options, kill and be rewarded or be killed. She won't hold anything back. You have to kill her to stop her." "You told her to kill me," Izuku shouted as he slashed at the woman again. She was slippery and flexible like an eel and had managed to avoid every strike Izuku had thrown at her, including a hellfire arrow. "Yes, not that she could. Also, you used the wrong quirks, so I wouldn't let her get away if I were you." Izuku cursed internally, and right as he was distracted the woman struck. Her unnaturally long and sharp nails cut into Izuku's wrist right between the sleeve and glove, drawing a surprised yelp from Izuku, but the cut was nothing compared to what came next. The burning agony radiated through Izuku's arm that fell down completely lax. The pain quickly spread throughout his body as all of his limbs failed, and he collapsed into a twitching mess on the floor. The burning had spread all across his body like his very blood was boiling. He couldn't shout, just whined quietly. The only things working properly were his eyes, and even those felt hot. The woman stood over him with a manic, outright bloodthirsty grin. "You might not be a quirkless monkey, but I still love it when people keep twitching like fish out of water." "Oh right," his father said with an exaggerated high tone, "I forgot to introduce her. This lovely lady is known as Iki. You might have heard of her in the news. Likes to torture and kill quirkless people. Those monkeys are like an anchor holding back the evolution of humanity," Iki said. "I think it's only fair if I get to have some fun with them while working to clean the gene pool. My venomous nails paralyze them, and when I get tired of letting the venom cause all the pain, I might make some art out of them. You actually remind me of a kid I dealt with a few weeks back." With every word Iki said, Izuku felt such a mix of disgust and rage, he barely noticed the pain anymore. "Now isn't that interesting, Shirakuro," his father said to him. "Can you see why I picked her? Imagine all she will do with her quirk after leaving here if you lose." Slowly seething, Izuku realized it wasn't just his anger. The pain, as bad as it was, wasn't as paralyzingly bad as before. He tried wiggling his toes. He had already lost, Iki said, and stepped closer to Izuku, raising her hand, fingers, and their nails extended. "Even with that scratch he would be paralyzed for a few more minutes. Last chance to change your mind on making me kill him." She screamed in pain as a blade of fire pierced straight through her calf. In a second Izuku pushed himself off the ground, pulled his feet back under him, and bounced up to deliver an uppercut with every ounce of strength in his body. The monster in front of him somehow held her balance for a moment, and her hand was already approaching Izuku. There wasn't even time to consider options of what to do. There was only enough time to activate his quirk. The hand hit the ground an instant before its owner's back. Screaming, Iki was holding the scorched stump of her right hand with her left. The nails of her remaining hand dripped a little bit of their poison as she gripped her damaged arm, but most people were immune to their own quirk. Grimacing from the pain, Izuku grabbed her remaining arm with one hand and slammed the other against her face. Of course, it wasn't that easy. She was flexible enough to kick Izuku back even from that position, and even after all of Izuku's training, her strength was nothing to ignore, especially when she started panicking. Izuku hardly distinguished all that from the pain he was already feeling. She was so tense and unconsciously resisting Izuku's all for one that it couldn't have been pleasant to her either, alongside the dismemberment of course. Soon Izuku's pain waned away, while Iki's resistance grew equally fiercer. She was actually using her cut stump of an arm to punch Izuku, who was glad for his helmet. She was still fighting with her remaining fingers extended, but when they hit Izuku's hand, it was just a poke. Her nails had shrunk to a normal size, and the attack only hurt her own fingers. She finally stopped moving, staring at Izuku in horror. "How do you like being quirkless?" Izuku asked coldly, no longer the least bit worried for his safety. He took off one of his gloves and with some focus was able to find the quirk within himself. His nails slowly grew longer and stronger, and he could feel the venom building up under them. He made sure to show them to Iki while lighting a dragon blade on the other. With vibration applied to it, he was actually using 3 quirks. "It's time to finish the son," his father said. "You wouldn't want her to get away with what she now knows about Izuku." Izuku froze. If his father intended to encourage him to act, it had backfired. Izuku hesitated. What was he supposed to do? He couldn't just. Iki's stare turned from horror to one of desperation, and she bounced with a scream, going straight for Izuku's throat. He dodged it almost as easily as Hitashi's attacks, but also swung forward with his blade as he had trained to do with Inomis. The scream ended with a gasp. The hand that had reached for Izuku fell down, and both their eyes turned down where the dragon blade went in through Iki's chest and out of her back. Her legs failed, and as she fell forward the blade kept cutting until it came out of Iki's shoulder, and she slumped on the floor. Izuku stepped back. His quirks disappeared from his shaking hands. He fell on his knees in front of the corpse, gasping for air. The only thing that stopped him from vomiting was the invisible gas mask in his helmet. He could only imagine the stench of the burnt flesh and blood. An arm landed on his shoulders. Another circled behind his back and pulled him against another body and up from the ground. "You did well. I am sorry, but this was necessary to prepare you for the world we exist in. Now you are ready," his father whispered while carrying Izuku. Izuku's gasping breath turned into whimpering as tears started blurring his vision. "Kurajiri," his father commanded, and darkness encased them. Izuku looked up at the UA wall and the tall buildings behind it with empty eyes. If the people around knew all that he had done, was it really right for him to be here? "Izuku?" A familiar voice called to him. Izuku turned towards it and responded. "Ashi?" Right or wrong, coming here was his best option. Izuku joined his friend and spotted Tenya inside the gate. "Hey Tennessee," Izuku shouted, but the taller teen didn't respond. Izuku looked at Hitachi. "I don't think that's it," Hitachi responded. Izuku pulled out his friend's notebook and crossed out the name idea. By the time he got the notebook back into his backpack, they had already reached Tenya. Izuku glanced at Hitachi. "How have you rested for the exam?" "Better than you from the look of things." "Huh?" Izuku stared at Hitachi, uncertain about what to say. "You look like you haven't slept since the last time we met up." "I would know." "Hitachi is correct. You have seemed increasingly tired and quiet for the past few days," Tenya said. "It is a very bad time to be tired even with your skill. Is this about the incident on Sunday, or did something else happen?" Unknown to Ida, the word stung Izuku. They would hate him if they knew. Nothing happened," he stuttered for the first time in a long while. "You think so lowly about us that you think we would believe that." Shinso poked Izuku's shoulder. "It's really nothing. The whole UA and entrance exams and All Might being a teacher here, and I saw Death Arms in the news bragging about how he'd save anyone in need. I've gone through every nightmare in the past few nights, including one where that guy on Sunday managed to." Izuku paused. "He was only partially lying, and then there is. What the hell are you doing here, villain?" Izuku froze mid-sentence. After a brief shock, his expression turned even more tired than it had been, undoing whatever impact Hitashi's and Tenya's presence had. He turned around to face Katsuki Bakugo for the first time in 10 months, since the walking garbage fire had told him to kill himself. "What do you think?" he asked. "I told you I was going to be the only person from our school to get into UA. Don't think that has changed just because you left for a few months. Do you really think they would even consider having a villain like you in this school?" "I could ask you the same?" Midoriya asked. His expression was blank, but he had inched closer to his friends. Whether it was to feel safer or be ready to protect them wasn't completely clear even to himself. Bakugo stared at him, even angrier than before. "What are you blabbering, nerds? He is saying that it is your actions that are villainous and not worthy of a hero, not Izuku's," Tenya said, waving his hand. "Oh, what would you extras know about either of us?" Bakugo said. "Everything relevant," Hitachi interjected. "Yes, that includes his quirk and everything you have done for the past 10 years. Your idea of a hero has to be pretty twisted to think you could be one." Really, you claim you know what this Deku's quirk is about, but you have no idea. You haven't actually experienced it. Yes, I have, Hitachi said. Bakugo froze, staring at him. Izuku has borrowed my quirk several times and helped me a lot with it. I don't see what the big deal is. Felt a bit strange being quirkless the first time, but it didn't bother me much. Bakugo's eye twitched, and he turned away with a huff. Not sure what he has done to you to make you spout garbage like that, but it's not like that was going to matter. You're not allowed to attack other applicants during the test, and there's no way that nerd is going to pass without using a quirk. Not that the school would accept someone like him. Just wait till they realize what his quirk does. Actually, Izuku said, having gained some composure and positioned himself in front of Hitachi. The principal already knows and encouraged all of us to apply. We had tea and spoke with him right after he banned a couple of bullies like you from even applying. This isn't Aldara Bakugo. You aren't a big fish in a small stale swamp anymore, and you aren't the best at everything. Surprisingly, Bakugo didn't explode or even respond to that, just walking away without a word. Perhaps mentioning the principal had been the right choice, even though they weren't as acquainted as he had made them out to be. Izuku staggered back as soon as the blonde-haired bomb stepped inside and disappeared out of sight. Luckily Tenya caught him before anything big enough to get attention happened. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yeah," Izuku said. "I've never talked to him or heard anyone else talk to him like that. I don't know how to feel." "You can feel like you stood up to a bully once again, but you shouldn't think about it too much. Today we all have to focus on one thing," Tenya encouraged. "And that is getting a higher score than him," Hitachi added. "You said he thinks he is best at everything. The best way to teach him a lesson is to score higher than him." "That is not what we are here to do," Tenya interrupted. "We should focus on doing the best we can to gain admittance to the school. And that requires getting the best possible score, same as teaching that guy a lesson," Hitachi said. "I like the idea," Izuku said. "I can't think of a better way to teach him a lesson, not legally, if I can do it. Well, I guess it doesn't hurt anyone or contradict the goals of the exam," Tenya admitted. "Frankly, it is less of a concern than your lack of sleep." I know," Izuku responded. "We should get going to find our exam rooms if we want to make it in time." "Right, let's go," Tenya declared. They were unfortunate enough to have different classrooms assigned for their written exams. Although it meant Hitachi and Tenya weren't around to question the reasons for Izuku's tiredness and dark demeanor. He could focus on the struggle of taking a written exam while sleep deprived. It wasn't quite as difficult as he had expected, or Kurogiri was just that good of a tutor. After the written exams, UA gave the hero course applicants a long lunch break, probably so people would not have to do the practical portion right after eating. It gave Izuku time to find Hitachi and Tenya without rushing straight to the cafeteria. He found the two waiting outside of it. "So how did your exam go?" Tenya asked. "I didn't fall asleep," Izuku responded and faced Tenya's stare for a few seconds before looking down. "I think I did fine. I thought it would be harder." "It wasn't as bad as I thought either," Hitachi said, "but I'm still worried." "I am sure you both did well," Tenya declared. "Now we should go eat to be at our best for the practical exam." They got their food and started looking for a free table. Hitachi suddenly moved in the way to guide Izuku in a sideways direction, which might have been strange if Izuku hadn't already noticed the explosive blonde out in front of them. Luckily, they found an empty corner table where some quick eaters had already left. Izuku sat between Hitachi and Tenya, imagining how this could become a daily thing if they did well. They just had to pass the practical exam if he could just focus on it. As he was finishing his lunch, Izuku could no longer hold back a large yawn. "Maybe you should take a nap. We still have an hour before the exam introduction session begins," Hitachi suggested. "Want help with that?" "I would say yes, but you might need it more to be at your best in the test," Izuku responded. "Hey, I've slept more in the last few days than a normal week." Izuku tilted his head to glance at Hitachi with a small smile. "That isn't a very high bar. You're the one that looks like a sleepwalker." "You should both sleep," Tenya remarked. Both Izuku and Hitachi turned to look at him as Izuku's face slowly twisted into a smirk. "So are you volunteering to make us?" Izuku asked. "I'm sure Tashi trusts you enough." Tenya blinked. "What? You know my ability to give quirks isn't limited to their original owner. If I let Tashi make me sleep, then I can't make him sleep, and the same applies the other way around, but you seem well rested already." "I am okay with that if Tenya can learn to use my quirk fast enough," Hitachi said. "Wouldn't you like to have two quirks for a while?" Didn't Izuku say it would be dangerous?" "One shouldn't be too bad, especially since it's not a very physically demanding quirk," Izuku said, "and I can take it back if there are problems." "Well, we aren't going to pressure you." "You don't need to," Tenya sighed. I have no reason to doubt you, and if Itachi is okay with giving away his quirk, who am I to refuse it? Okay, Izuku said, and slowly raised his hands to each of his friends' heads. Let's see how this works out. Izuku closed his eyes and focused on finding and transferring the quirk. That was something he was fully capable of already, but this time he tried to directly transfer the quirk forward. He could feel the quirk slowly flowing in and straight back out. His hands dropped back down. How are you feeling? Izuku asked Tenya. A little ill actually, and I think I am getting a headache. That sounds pretty normal, Izuku assured. Try to use the quirk with Tashi, and we'll see if it gets any worse. It took Tenya a while to get a grasp of the quirk, but he had already seen Hitachi teach Izuku, so with plenty of the break still left he got Hitachi to fall for the brainwashing. With a few words, Hitachi slumped against Izuku as he fell asleep. Next, Tenya focused on Izuku, who was keeping an eye on nearby people who had started paying more attention to them. If you start feeling any worse, wake me up, Izuku said, and Tenya nodded. Are you ready? Tenya asked. Yes, Izuku responded and was caught by the quirk. Everything went dark. At least the quirk-induced sleep was dreamless like anesthesia, so for the first time in several days he was free of the nightmares. He woke up to Tenya shaking his shoulder, stretching his arms while blinking away the sleepiness. I needed that, he said, for 10 more hours. This isn't a time for joking. The practical exam introduction session is going to start in 10 minutes. Izuku's eyes widened. He turned to check Hitachi, who was in a similar state. Without a word he put his hands back on their heads and returned Hitachi's quirk. Then they ran, finding and arriving at the auditorium just in time as a staff member was about to close the doors. The auditorium was dark and full, so they were separated, taking whatever empty seats they could find. Izuku was the last without a seat, and the pro-hero teacher Present Mick had just arrived on the stage, so when he saw an empty seat, he took it without a second thought. Welcome to today's live performance. Everybody say hey. The so-called hero shouted way louder than necessary even in the large space. Wow, glad I didn't sit in the front row, Izuku mumbled. So you chose to sit here, damn villain. Izuku froze still for a moment before his head turned to the side, stiff as a robot. Of course he had to sit right next to the walking bucket of nitroglycerin. Not quite so right next to anymore. Bakugo had dragged his chair as far from Izuku as he could without sitting on the next person's lap. Great, Izuku muttered, and focused on the presentation and papers he had gotten for the test. Present Mick was just explaining how they would be divided on the examination grounds. Hey, nerd, Bakugo called. Izuku wasn't sure if he should have been annoyed or concerned that the garbage fire talked to him. What area are you in? B, why do you care? Izuku responded and settled on concern when Bakugo's mouth twisted in a smirk that made Tamura look like a paragon hero. Seems we are in the same area. So you can see me score higher than you, Izuku said. Didn't think you'd be excited about that. He turned his focus back on Present Mick, but seething Bakugo didn't care about the presentation, so Izuku's hand was already in his pocket when the explosive teen finally talked. You're a dead man. Izuku picked out a business card and slid it across the table towards Bakugo. Then you are going to need this. And what the hell is it? Contact information for my father's lawyers. If you don't understand what it's for, ask your mother. Izuku turned to face back forward, ignoring the confused and seething dynamite stick next to him. At least he tried to ignore it while forcing himself to control his breathing. He got a welcome distraction when Ida got up to question an apparent inconsistency between the presentation and written material they had received. Apparently one of the robot opponents listed was worth 0 points. Present Mick explained it away as being one that applicants are just meant to avoid. That doesn't make sense, Izuku muttered quietly. Heroes are supposed to face the villains and risk themselves to help people. They are teaching people to run away. The video clip of Death Arms leaving Izuku's mother to die flashed in his mind. He squeezed his eyes shut and drew a deep breath. Maybe there is something more to it, he concluded or hoped. Something to do with a secret part of the test maybe. Plus ultra. Break a leg everyone. Present Mick ended his presentation. Izuku didn't waste any time getting away from the volatile firecracker next to him. On the way to the exam grounds he looked at what was ahead and started truly understanding the immensity of UA. The exam grounds were entire mini-cities. Izuku couldn't help but wonder how much UA spent on things that only helped one course, a minority among the student body. Even the walls and gates around the grounds were excessively large, as if they were built only to look imposing to people. Izuku navigated through the crowd, trying to get into the front row, anything to get an edge over Bakugo. Unfortunately the pyromaniac had the same idea, and while coming up from different sides of a small group, they didn't notice each other before literally bumping into each other. Izuku tensed when he realized that, but Bakugo jumped back already in a fighting stance. "Stay away from me, thief. Are you still going on about that? Keep saying it, and I'll beat this exam with your quirk," Midoriya said before he realized what he was saying, while Bakugo's shout had attracted the attention of other applicants. What are they talking about using his quirk? Maybe he has a quirk copying quirk like you. Izuku blinked, thinking, what did he say? No. Bakugo shouted and presented his most arrogant and devious grin. This guy is a quirk stealer. If you let him touch you, he can take your quirk away. Let your guard down for a second and you'll be quirkless. You wouldn't even know it before you tried to use it. Wouldn't be surprised if he only came here to look for quirks to steal. Within a few seconds of those words, Izuku had an all too empty area around him that no one entered. Izuku looked around, but it only made people step further away. One person brought his tail up as if he was ready to strike at Izuku if he approached. Izuku could have retorted back about the dangers of Bakugo's quirk, but instead his shoulders slumped. There was no point. He knew it all too well. The walking loudspeaker had won this round, and he didn't mean present Mick. Maybe he could get Hitachi and Tenya to come over after the exam. He really needed their emotional support, or maybe he could hang out with Kurogiri. With them he sometimes almost forgot how despicable the society and many of the people around them were. In a way he thanked Bakugo for reminding him of that and his purpose for being here. "And begin." Present Mick shouted in the background. Izuku turned to notice the gate had opened and ran in. The people in front of him who had heard Bakugo jumped out of his way as he ran. "What's wrong?" The tests started. "Run, run. The die is cast." The crowd of applicants was unleashed after Izuku. Rapid banging was the only warning before Bakugo flew past Izuku along with a few other students with speed-enhancing quirks. He bit his teeth together and pushed himself to run faster. The one-point robot charged from a side alley right in front of Izuku and threw a punch. Izuku sidestepped it easily and by then had the dragon blade ignited already. He rammed it right into the robot's chest around a joint where its neck met a stronger piece of armor. Even so he could feel resistance as the blade struggled to cut through the armor, much harder than even Nomu's skin. The robot had already raised its other arm to strike when its systems finally failed. Without wasting a second, Izuku dove away from under the falling husk of junk metal and kept running. That had only been a one-pointer. He wasn't going to beat Bakugo like this. He focused all his attention and needed to succeed on making his fire hotter, vibrations faster, blade thinner. Hotter, faster, thinner, another one-pointer showed up and charged at him with a wide swing of its arm. Izuku brought his blade up to block. The force still shook his entire body as the metal of the robot smoked. Hotter, faster, thinner. He turned his arm and pressed against the robot. His blade sunk through its armor and something inside sparked and the robot's arm stopped. Izuku swung his other blade forward and this time it sank in faster, not fast enough though. The entire exam ground had descended into chaos. Izuku briefly saw Bakugo flying in an arch over some distant applicants. He disappeared behind a corner and there was a flash of an explosion. Izuku changed direction, not even trying to catch up to the faster applicants that had headed directly towards the center of the exam grounds. He needed to find more robots and beat them faster. His entire arm tensed as he pushed the quirks. Soon he found two one-pointers and a larger three-pointer together. The three-pointer had bulkier arms and shoulders that looked like rocket launchers. Hotter. Izuku thought about all the heroes that had failed his mother, All Might who had crippled his father, Bakugo, and everyone who had judged him after the blonde torment told them about his quirk. Izuku wasn't fighting robots. He was fighting a wall those people erected seeking to keep away people like him, or Hitachi, and at this rate it might well succeed. A far too familiar explosion echoed from the distance. Anger heated to rage, and his fire followed. He charged at the nearest one-pointer, sidestepped its strike like before, and swung his blade straight through the robot's chest with no more resistance than it had previously faced against Nomus's arms. The other one-pointer lost both its arms in a single move. The sudden loss of weight made it stumble. Izuku jumped on and over the bot, decapitating it as he did. The three-pointer was too slow to stop Izuku as he landed on its face and hanging onto it with one arm, sunk his blade deep into the robot's insides. With all three destroyed, Izuku finally stopped for long enough to stare at his flaming blade. It had turned blue and much more solid looking than before. The surprise at the sudden change made him briefly lose focus and the fire started being tainted by hints of orange. He quickly took back control of the quirks and managed to force it back to its new form. Strangely, while the blade was clearly much hotter, it only felt a little more unpleasant against his hand, as if the heat was more contained. A four-legged two-pointer rushed along the street towards him. Izuku decided to try everything he had. Raising his hand towards the approaching robot, he focused on the Hellfire Arrow quirk, trying to make it feel like his blade. The robot was only a few meters away when he was ready and released the quirk. What appeared wasn't as much an arrow as a blue oval-shaped blast that made a quick whistling sound before it struck the robot's neck and in a blue flash, explosively separated it from its body. Izuku smirked and whispered to himself, "Seems you aren't the only one with an explosive quirk here, Kaken." He got back on the move, and while he was limited by his, still impressive, running speed compared to those with speed quirks, he no longer wasted much time on the robots. He only stopped at a crossroad to send 2 of his newly blue blasts at approaching 1 and 2 point robots. One hit took the 2-pointer out, but the other only grazed the 1-pointer's arm, and Izuku was still too slow with this quirk to fire off another, so he settled on the dodge and decapitate tactic and moved on. He couldn't slow down or hesitate. Every explosion in the background fueled his own flame. The constant background cacophony of battle was cut by a nearby panicked shout. The trio of applicants had been surrounded by an entire group of robots of all 3 types against the outer wall of the exam grounds. One of them, a really short guy, threw purple balls growing from his head at the robots that seemed to stick to them and limit their movements, probably why they hadn't yet been captured or crushed despite being clearly out of their league. Izuku charged at the group of robots like someone whose ability to hesitate in battle had been beaten out of him by genetically engineered monsters. He jumped on a 2-pointer and decapitated it while using it as a stepping board to leap on the 3-pointer's back. A blade of blue flame sunk in and then cut up through the robot's body and out of its shoulder. An image of a dead woman with the same wound flashed in Izuku's mind. So maybe there were still some things that could make him hesitate, or at least stop long enough to fight against the urge to vomit. "Wait, is that the quirk stealer?" one of the other applicants said, breaking Izuku away from his thoughts. "Wouldn't that mean he took that quirk from someone? Better keep a safe distance." 10 seconds later, all of the remaining robots were in 3 or more pieces. Izuku stopped briefly to give the trio a cold stare. The little bald-headed guy was so terrified tears were flowing from his eyes as he faced Izuku. Izuku raised his arm and barely looked, fired off another blast at an approaching 1-pointer. Pieces of metal that used to be the robot clattered on the street. "You should head back towards the gate. It should be the safest area by now," he said, and started running again, charging or firing a blue blast at every robot that he saw until he was back somewhere near the center of the grounds. There couldn't be much time left. Robot pieces flew out from behind a corner following an explosion, and Bakugo stepped to the crossroad a few seconds later, a fierce animalistic look in his eyes which quickly found Izuku and his still-lit blades. For a brief instant the hot-headed blonde seemed more disgusted than angry. His head snapped to the side when a 3-pointer charged towards them. Bakugo flew up and towards it with rapid small explosions, but Izuku's blasts were faster, and 2 blue blasts hit the robot's armored face before Bakugo landed on it and blasted its back open. There was no way of telling who got the points. "Stay out of my way, Deku." Izuku's flames got a little hotter. Before he could respond, the ground started shaking. A gigantic figure rose over the fake apartment buildings, the 0-point robot. It raised its gigantic arm and punched the ground, creating a pressure wave and a dust cloud that struck Izuku like a storm. He had to spend a few seconds blinking dust out of his eyes. Why the hell would they send something like that against middle school students? Izuku said, more focused on analyzing the situation than running away like everyone else around him. Maybe they wanted to see if anyone actually dared to take it on. Test if people were actually willing to risk everything, but there were no points in it. Could they really be teaching people the opposite, to run away when facing danger? He fired off several blasts on the robot, landing them on it in a vertical spray, reaching from its track to the distant head, far enough up that the blasts seemed to lose some of their power before reaching their targets. The explosions were impressive, but if he had penetrated the armor, the holes were too small to see from so far away. The robot didn't care, at least. It didn't look like something Izuku could take down, and the monster of a machine was rolling right towards him, crushing everything in its path. Biting his teeth together, he turned around to get out of the way at least long enough to find a new way to attack. Even if it was just an exam, he was not going to be one of the fake heroes running away from danger. Bakugo was already long gone. A too familiar scream made Izuku look back one more time. It was the little guy with purple balls growing from his head again. He had apparently just gotten out of a building on the giant robot's path of destruction and couldn't run fast enough to get out of the way of the approaching tracks of the robot. He kept throwing his sticky balls at the robot's track so fast his head bled, but the giant machine didn't slow at all. "Damn it!" Izuku shouted. He ran towards the bald-head guy and grabbed the short boy's arm. The guy jolted from the sudden touch, but Izuku lifted him and was already moving before he realized what was happening. At least the little guy was light. Even carrying the other boy on his shoulders like a sack of potatoes, Izuku still ran faster than the shorter teen had. He barely kept ahead of the giant robot that thankfully didn't try to punch him. The surviving one-pointer jumped from a side street, trying to attack Izuku, and found itself split in two before touching the ground. The guy he carried yelped as Izuku jolted to the side, dodging the robot. Izuku didn't even slow down until "Time's up," President Mick declared. The robot stopped. Izuku too stopped running and let go of the other guy. Extinguishing his quirks, he leaned against his knees, winded from the battle. "Thank why," the bald head guy started saying, but fell silent as he turned to look at Izuku. There was no doubt of what he was thinking as his hand went up to his head to check the balls were still there. Izuku sighed and turned away. "I'm not going to take your quirk." He headed back to the entrance, counting his points. 49 plus 2 is 51, then 54, and so 55 total. Is that enough? I can probably get in with it, but with how fast Bakugo was moving, he probably got more. Izuku wanted to punch something, but he walked in the middle of the road, and people around him were still out of arm's reach. Outside the big gate, he looked up at the sky, already breathing easier despite the earlier exertion. At least it was done. He hated the idea of probably losing to Bakugo, but that was only a side mission, as Tamura would put it. Glancing towards the other exam grounds, his thoughts started moving to Hitachi and Tenya. After changing clothes, the scattered crowds of applicants started to dribble back towards the main building and gate. Izuku wanted to run, but he had already gotten too much attention. He reached the front of the main building alongside the first larger crowd of students. Some walked straight out of the gates, while others congregated to talk about the exam in small groups, probably with their friends. Izuku looked around for him. He could really have used some senses-enhancing quirks in addition to more mobility. Luckily Tenya was tall, and Izuku soon spotted his head above those around him. Izuku sneaked up behind him unnoticed and tapped his back. Tenya jolted a bit but relaxed when he saw Izuku. "Hey, how did you do?" Izuku asked. "I believe I did well enough to pass. I counted 52 points. "Really?" Izuku said, surprised. "I actually beat you despite your speed." "I would not be surprised by that," Tenya said. "How many points did you get?" "Maybe 55, I'm not quite sure how they are going to assign points for one three-pointer, so I guess we could have an equal score." Izuku got more serious. "Did you notice any other sides to the exam?" "Nothing obvious beyond the apparent lack of sufficient safety measures. This exam might not be too dangerous for those who are selected as hero students, but the entrance exams can be attended by anyone." "True, I had to save this one kid twice." Izuku paused and glanced down at the ground, and he was still only focused on what my quirk could do to him. "Did you actually use it on the exam?" Tenya asked wide-eyed. "No, but Bakugo told everyone. We were in the same area." "Oh," Tenya said, and after a few seconds started looking around. "Do you see Tashi anywhere?" Izuku asked, reading Tenya's intention. Hitachi was an expert at curing his quirk discrimination-related depression. "No, and the crowd is just getting worse." Izuku stared at the crowd for a moment and then raised one of his arms straight up and fired off a fire arrow, just a regular orange one that Hitachi already knew. "I am not sure that is allowed," Tenya pointed out. Izuku didn't comment, just kept looking around. Maybe if he had a coffee-making quirk. A few students, surprised by Izuku's fire arrow, concluded there was nothing more happening and moved on, revealing Hitachi heading straight for the waiting duo. Izuku immediately focused on his gloomy expression. His body moved before he even thought about it, and Hitachi found himself trapped with Izuku's arm going over his shoulders, and his friend smiled, destroying any thoughts of escape. "Hey, it couldn't have been that bad." "I don't know about that," Hitachi sighed. "I found the switch to shut the robots down, but still only got 15 points. You think that is enough to get in?" We still don't know if that was all there was to the test. Even if there is, even if they have a whole second point system, what are my chances against those who already got several times the points from the fight?" Shinso fell silent for a moment. "Speaking of which, how did you do?" "Well," Izuku hesitated. "Please, I need to hear at least some good news." "I got 52 or 55, Tenya got 52. "You will get in," Hitachi said, and smiled for the first time. "Maybe I can still get into the general studies. Maybe if I didn't stay with that guy for so long." "What guy?" Izuku asked, still keeping Hitachi in his hold as they started walking to the gate. "After I figured out how to shut down the robots, I managed to take out a couple of them. I couldn't really surprise them, but their attacks were slower than Tenya's. Your dodge and counterattack style worked great. Then another applicant got driven into a corner by two robots. I managed to jump one of them while they were focusing on him, but he got hit pretty badly fighting the other that fell on him. I think he broke an arm and a leg at least. He definitely screamed like he did. I had to use my quirk on him to stop him from moving and hurting himself more. And to stop the pain, Izuku reminded me. With the fog you put on people's minds, even broken bones probably aren't that bad." Right, you figured that out. Well, I thought the school would send someone to help him, since they monitored everything that was going on, but instead they sent in that giant zero-point robot. I had to carry him on my back to get away. I'd say that was pretty heroic, Izuku said. Truly, you did what any reasonable person would expect of a hero, Tenya added. The school would be foolish not to accept you for that. Tenya, Hitachi said, slightly embarrassed, did you just criticize UA, the most elite of elite schools? I mean, they probably aren't fools like that. I am sure they recognize your actions. We can hope. Anyway, did anything interesting happen with your exams? A lot actually, Izuku said. See. He raised his other hand and lit the dragon blade. It was its usual orange flaming blade. Izuku focused on it. I might not have a shelf full of quirk notes, but that's just your normal dragon blade, Hitachi said. I need to focus, Izuku said. With the intensity and adrenaline of the battle gone, it was suddenly much harder to raise the heat. It needed more than focus. Izuku struggled to replicate the feeling of before despite being calm this time. Izuku blinked in realization. He shifted his focus into the feelings he had felt. Bakugo would hate to know his presence alone had helped Izuku. Hey, is what someone said outside their group. The quirk stealer. What? We heard that guy can take away your quirk if he touches you. Better keep your distance. Then where did he get that fire quirk? More like from who? Izuku gritted his teeth. His blade condensed and started burning ever brighter until its color started shifting. He held his hand further away to not accidentally burn Hitachi or himself as the blade reached its full blue shine. This time he made sure to memorize every aspect of how it felt with a clear mind. I couldn't cut the robots well at first. Then this happened. Their armor didn't really matter after that. So, you weren't satisfied with seeing glowing swords in movies, Hitachi said. You just had to turn your quirk into one, a cooler one at that. I don't think everyone agrees with you, Izuku responded, glancing at the nearby people that were still whispering about him. So, what about them? Most of them won't get into the hero course like you, if any. Yeah, probably, Izuku said, and extinguished his quirk. So now that we're done, do you have time to go somewhere so we can hang out and have dinner? Shota Izawa, also known as the Pro Hero Racerhead, arrived at the principal's office of UA High School. He was a teacher, so it was not anything unusual, but what awaited him inside was. Principal Nezu was there of course, but so was their newest teacher All Might, in his small form, and the school nurse, Recovery Girl. Most concerning was the individual present who was not part of the school staff, though still a familiar face, Police Detective Tsukauchi. Izawa made sure he closed the door properly. Thank you for coming to Izawa. There is a matter we need to discuss before the start of the new term. Is it about one of my new students? Izawa asked, and glanced at Detective Tsukauchi. Or is one of my current ones suspected of a crime? Considering the admission papers on the table, I am guessing you are investigating a new student and plan to have him or her in my class since Vlad isn't here. You're correct, Principal Nezu said. There are some special concerns considering one of our new students that we want to approach carefully for his benefit as well as investigatory concerns. As far as school staff is concerned, only those present and Hound Dog as the counselor are involved in discussing the topic. Nezu paused, a serious expression crossing his face before continuing. Tell me, how much do you know about All for One? Izawa tensed. His former tired and slightly annoyed demeanor disappeared, replaced by a focused stare and a frown. Probably more than most heroes in my age group, especially public heroes, let alone civilians. Back when I graduated, he was said to still control most organized crime in the country, but there were no real sightings for several years, even before I became a hero. I don't think I have heard anything but old legends about him for years. That is because I defeated and killed him 6 years ago, All Might said. That is where I got my injuries. Heroes aren't supposed to kill people you know, Izawa commented. Maybe so, All Might said, but he is different. As an underground hero, you of all people should know that we can't always be the way people expect heroes to act. True. Now, how does this relate to my students? The major reason All for One could gain such power was his quirk and unique ability to take and give others quirks, essentially the ability to hoard or redistribute power in the society as he saw fit, Nezu stated. He handed Izawa one of the admission papers with student information and put footage of the practical exam on a large screen hanging on the wall of his office. It was showing a teen with thick white hair, impressive physical ability, and a fire-based quirk. That quirk is no longer unique. Another person has emerged with seemingly the same abilities. Izuku Midoriya scored the highest score in the Hero Course practical exam and will be attending your class. Are you sure he has the same quirk? Izawa asked. Yes, I was lucky to meet him at an educational fair a few months back. He stood up for another student he didn't even know was being bullied for his quirk and later admitted to me what his real quirk could do, though he was hesitant to do so. The official quirk registry support this also, though they refer to it as quirk transfer and only registered his quirk when he was 13. So, as always started, if that is the case, where did the fire quirk come from? Seems like something we should at least question before admitting him. Do you think I haven't already done that? Nezu responded. According to Midoriya, someone with that quirk attempted to kidnap him, so he took the quirk in self-defense. This let him get away, but he didn't tell people at the time due to prejudice he has experienced because of his quirk. That is what he said anyway. Detective Tsukauchi has been investigating the matter while checking on the boy's background. Detective. Unfortunately, the conclusion of my investigation isn't as conclusive as I would like. I have identified a known criminal with a fire-based quirk similar to his, at least in basic form. It seems he has been able to advance the quirk quite a bit, from the look of things even during your exams. Unfortunately, I have been unable to confirm this man is truly the origin of the quirk. In other words, you haven't managed to be in contact with this person. No, Tsukauchi responded. It seems no one has seen him in nearly a year. Same goes for several known acquaintances. It is unclear if they are on the run for some crime or worse. Unfortunately, I have not been able to find more, especially while staying discreet. I'm afraid it is the same with the other investigation. I have not found a connection with All For One, the person, but I also couldn't completely rule it out. Considering his age, there could be a connection several generations back that could be impossible to identify, even if I had good information, and I don't. His father Hisashi Midoriya especially is a mystery. He seems to have familial connections to the United States and has spent much of his and his son's life working there. Unfortunately, that limits what I can do, especially in secret and without any evidence of a crime. So, his father lives abroad, and how about the mother? Aizawa asked. Both Tsukauchi and All Might's expressions darkened. The mother Inko Midoriya was killed by a villain last spring. It was my fault, All Might said. He got away from me earlier that day and I came too late to save Midoriya's mother. I didn't even realize who I was talking to when we met at that fair. He must hate me. Unfortunately, you are likely correct, Tsukauchi said. I talked with the police officers who were present when Izuku Midoriya was informed about his mother's death. He found a video of it online and threw his phone across the room, cursing the heroes when All Might arrived late. So he has one of, if not the most powerful quirk in the world that people naturally fear and hate, something that can really mess up your life in modern society. He witnessed his mother died due to the failure of the #1 hero, and his father is not even in the country most of the time, as always said, feeling a headache coming, and pinched his nose, and we cannot completely rule out a family connection with All For One himself. That would seem to be the case, Tsukauchi confirmed. He even looks like All For One, All Might muttered, though maybe it's just the hair. Aizawa glanced at All Might briefly before focusing on Nezu. I am surprised he is even applying at UA, Aizawa concluded, with everything and everyone in his life apparently pushing him to become a villain. It's a near-perfect backstory to make a villain, and not because he shares a quirk with one. It certainly wasn't an easy decision for him, Nezu responded. Admitting to his quirk wasn't the only thing he hesitated to talk about when we met. Seems he had childhood dreams of becoming a hero that he lost. In fact, if I had to describe him when we met, I would say he was lost with no path forward that he really cared about, a precarious position to be in especially for someone with so much potential. Luckily you are wrong about everyone pushing him to be a villain. Young Shinso and Ida appear to have helped him find his path toward being a hero. Shinso and Ida? Aizawa asked. I think I read their names on the admission lists. Correct, Nezu said, and replaced the exam footage with what seemed like pictures of school security cameras. Every single one showed 3 boys, Midoriya, and 2 others, one walking in through UA gates, one talking to an angry-looking boy while standing together, with Midoriya standing in front of his friends protectively, and one of the trio eating lunch together. In one picture Midoriya and one of his friends seemed to be asleep, leaning against each other while their taller friend sat next to them. Seems they stayed together all the time they were here, except when separated for the exams, and also left together. The taller of them is Tenyu Ida, younger brother of the hero Ingenium with a similar engine quirk. He is coming from the same school as Midoriya. The other one is Hitachi Shinso from a different school. As far as I can tell, they first met him at the education fair. He was the one being bullied for his quirk that Midoriya helped. And what is his quirk? Aizawa asked. It is called brainwashing. I am sure you can deduce what consequences that might have caused him. Yes, Aizawa admitted, and the design of the entrance exams in this school wouldn't help that. Actually, he passed thanks to the hero points, Nezu said. Doesn't change my point. They were quiet for a moment before Nezu continued. I have placed all three of them together in your class. If those two convinced him to pursue heroics again, they are our best insurance to keep him on that path. I agree that keeping the three together is the best choice, as always said, but I don't like how you keep talking about him like he was constantly on the edge of becoming another all for one. It is exactly that kind of attitude that makes it a threat. I know why you assigned them to my class, but Midoriya needs a non-prejudiced guidance, not a security guard capable of erasing his quirks. As he spoke about guidance, Aizawa glanced at All Might. I just hope it isn't too late, he added. I agree with Aizawa. The recovery girl joined the conversation. I have had some experience with bullied and abused people in the past. Based on what I have heard and seen so far, I would expect Midoriya to be wary and distrusting of people, especially teachers if the previous ones let things become as bad as Nezu has described. He is also likely to have sensitive topics you should watch your words around. You will be fighting an uphill battle even if you can share some similar experiences. That is part of the job description as a hero and teacher, Aizawa responded. Recovery girl nodded. He is also likely very attached and protective to those few that have accepted him and earned his trust. That can help you if you win them over, but one mistake with either of them and you will be back on the starting line with Midoriya or worse. Losing trust is much easier than earning it. Speaking of protectiveness, Tsukauchi interrupted. There was one more incident that came up during my investigation. A few days before the entrance exam, those three were involved in a confrontation with some street criminals, drugs, gang activity, and such. Seems they ran into and threatened Shinso. When the police arrived, they were all standing against a wall brainwashed. Sounds like Shinso has hero potential, Aizawa noted. I cannot comment on that, but he didn't resolve the situation himself. Apparently Midoriya took one of them down in seconds. They swear he almost killed the man in rage. The man's chin was broken, and there were severe burns on his hand. To be fair, he could turn that hand into a sword and was seeking to stab Shinso according to eyewitnesses. Impressive for a junior high student, Aizawa admitted, but legally questionable. That is what the police on scene thought, perhaps even too strongly, Tsukauchi admitted, but Midoriya had lawyers on the phone before they even arrived. Self-defense and quirk restriction laws are complex enough combinations that with their young age, there was no prosecution against Midoriya or Shinso. Also, one prosecutor resigned around the same time for unknown reasons. Them not being prosecuted is probably for the best, but the whole situation raises some concerns, as always said. Seeking to protect is the core of being a hero, but how one approaches it is equally important. If Midoriya was truly close to inflicting greater injury or death, that is a major problem to consider. Speaking of which, are you still trying to investigate him? If opportunities come up, Tsukauchi answered. There isn't much more I can do inconspicuously or without a valid suspicion of a crime beyond possibly excessive self-defense. I cannot forcibly question Midoriya or use my quirk without some evidence of a crime. I have discussed with Nezu about holding guest lectures on criminal investigations and hero police cooperation to get around that. Don't destroy my hopes of teaching him by getting caught trying to trick him into being questioned with your quirk, Aizawa warned. Tsukauchi took a step back, facing his stare. He held his hands up defensively. Don't worry. It is not my first discreet investigation. Aizawa got up and looked at Nezu with tired eyes. If you are concerned that he might veer off the path of a hero, don't give him any reasons to do so and let me do my job. We are counting on you, Nezu responded. Without wasting any more words, Aizawa got up and turned to leave. One more thing, Nezu said. Do not expel him. Aizawa waved his hand and left. In the corridor he read through the profile of Izuku Midoriya, who was turning out to be his newest problem child. He had meant every word he told Nezu and the others, but couldn't deny that he wanted more information. Even with Recovery Girl's evaluation, he didn't really know how Midoriya's mental state was. He needed to learn about the kid without targeting him specifically. The first day would show him plenty. People tended to show more of their true nature under pressure, and that was Aizawa's specialty. Thanks for watching this video. Part 5 is over. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. And also check out the playlist that I have created and enjoy. Link is in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.